One of the most striking pieces in the museum's collection, it can be found in our life section, and it's this Victorian wedding dress. This wedding dress was owned by a lady called Eliza Fenton, and she married Lawrence Downey in the late 1800s wearing this wedding dress. As a person, we're lucky enough to be able to, we can tell a little bit about this individual because of her family connection. And we know that she was quite the lady. For the time that she was in, she was very modern thinking, very much all about, business, about her hobbies, didn't really care what people thought. And I just find that quite inspiring for a woman of that time period. For our modern eyes, there's two elements of this dress that really stand out. And the first is the colour. For a wedding dress, it's purple. In our modern eye, we see white as the colour of wedding dresses. So a lot of people do ask, well, if it's a wedding dress, why is it purple? And that basically comes down to practicalities. We're talking about the late Victorian period. We're coming from a time when clothing had to be made to fit the individual. We are coming from a disposable clothing age. We can go to Dunnes or Rever, pick up a t-shirt, jeans, and walk out the door with it. In this time period, everything had to be made to fit the individual. So if you're going to buy an item, you want to make sure it's something you can wear again. So that's why it was very rare you'd find colours of white on an individual. At that period, Queen Victoria actually made white wedding dresses quite popular, but therefore you had to have quite a bit of money in order to have a dress for one day that you'd never wear again, which is the norm nowadays. There's actually evidence on the skirt of this dress that later on it was let out, so we do know that Eliza wore the dress, not the jacket now, but the skirt later on. Another element that really stands out is the size of the waist. It's absolutely tiny. And it brings all these connotations of corsetry, tight-fitting, uncomfortable, Victorian ladies swooning all over the place. And a lot of people think, oh, women at that time, it was a torture device. They're walking around, being squeezed to death in these corsets. But it's actually the opposite. We have a very modern view of corsets. We're coming from a period where we wear loose, comfortable clothing, and we see something tight-fitting as just being, completely uncomfortable, not what we want to wear. But in actual fact, not only were these, trying to get a silhouette, they were actually functional. So the idea of a corset is to kind of give the body a silhouette, a particular silhouette. And at this particular period in time, the silhouette was very hourglass. It was a maternal figure of the narrow waist, the bustle at the back, flat skirts at the front, and kind of dropped shoulders. That was the silhouette they wanted to appear. People at this period in time, they weren't obsessed with figures like we are today. We're very much obsessed with our weight in this modern period, where back then they let the clothes kind of dictate the shape for them, which I think is quite interesting. The corset itself, it wasn't as uncomfortable as people think it is. Corsets were made of material like whalebone, which, like our nails, when warm, actually molds to the skin. It's pliable. So they were actually quite comfortable. They supported the back, they supported the bust. There is this connotation where people often think because they wore corsets all the time, they must have had really bad posture, they must have had weak core muscles. Most Victorian women worked. So they would have been doing laborious tasks. They would have been, even the well-to-do ladies would have been riding horses. That's all core muscles. So that probably isn't true to the full extent. We just have this modern view of them walking around really uncomfortable when it really, really wasn't the case. Another interesting element of this dress is actually the fabric itself. So the lady who purchased this and who got this made for her wedding, it's made from a silk poplin fabric, which is a mixed weave fabric. It's quite expensive. And the cuffs on it are actually Irish crochet. For this time, with this lady, with the money she would have had, she would have been able to afford very high-end Indian silks. She would have been able to afford the finest lace. But she chose to have Irish-made fabric. She chose to have Irish crochet. So there is a theory of thought that perhaps this is her way of showing her love for her country in a time period when women's opinions on political issues probably wasn't, recognised per se. We're talking about 1890s. So it's a subtle way of her showing her republicanism in the only way that she felt maybe that she had.